my gas mask hooked up to that. I really should cover this in more depth. I was in my gas mask at one point in the Gulf War because there was all the talk about chemical munitions. I do believe we ran over something that resembled mustard gas or something. I definitely had a very acrid, very strange smell one time when we were driving the tank once. But at any rate, I remember one time we were told to put on our gas mask because I think we were under artillery fire at that time. It was actually one of the few close calls I had during the Gulf War where there was some very close artillery fire on our tanks. And, of course, we were afraid that they would have chemical munitions in them, and I think that's when we put our gas masks on. You don't wear it typically when you're driving for a lot of reasons, but mainly because you can't see much. You can't see much out of the tank when you're buttoned up to begin with, much less than if you put a gas mask on and now you're looking out of two little goggle holes. But, of course, compared to the death that awaits you through chemical weapons, we gladly put it on when we were told that there might be a significant chance to have an issue with those artillery rounds. And then when there's a hose, and you connect the hose to the canister on your gas mask into that system that I was pointing out earlier. And then that regulates the airflow. And it is actually fairly cool. So that normally you get really hot when you're wearing your gas mask and your NBC equipment. So that thing does kind of keep you cool, but it's not really meant there to air condition you. People would always say it's air conditioned, and we'd always sort of roll our eyes about the M1 being air conditioned. It's ridiculous. You had to be wearing a gas mask where therefore you couldn't see much to get the benefit of being air conditioned. On the left side of the driver's hole, there is a large canister and filtration system, and you have some knobs that help control the airflow of that. That's something the driver does as well. In the Gulf War, we were given nerve agent pills that, like they like to do, I'm sure had not been tested, and there was a lot of Gulf War syndrome talk about those pills we had taken might have contributed to some of the Gulf War syndrome. I did, unfortunately, take a couple of the nerve agent pills. Tank commander told us to take them, and I took a couple, and then after I took two of them, I started thinking, I don't know what this is I'm taking, and thank goodness I only took two of them. Maybe it would have saved my life, who knows, but I'll take my chances that the Army had no idea what those things actually did to you, and the effectiveness was probably questionable. There's been a lot of studies about what those nerve agent pills were. When you're in the Army, you don't get the choice to take inoculations. We were in the Gulf War when they lined us up, and long lines of guys getting shots in our arm that there was no saying no to it. It's not like being a civilian. But the pills that they gave us when I was in the tank, the tank commander's up in the turret, I'm in the driver's hole. He has no idea whether I'm taking those pills or not. And again, I did take two of them, but never took all the rest. We were supposed to take, one every so often or something to help protect us in case of chemical warfare. But anyway, so that whole section there I was pointing out is all about the NBC system that the M1 tank has. Speaking of not being able to see much, here's a tank rolling out. This is basically what you get to see, not a whole lot. There are some vision blocks on the left and right side, but you don't really use those when you're driving forward. They're marginally helpful. This is it. That's about all you get to see, that little bit of the world. That's why you really rely on your tank commander to tell you where to go. This is a nice flat road, so you can imagine how difficult it is to navigate on uneven terrain around hills, and you're going up and down elevation. You can't see much. I think it's really restrictive compared to what most people think that the driver can see when you're buttoned up. That's why you don't button up in normal conditions outside of combat. Here you can see it's even harder to see when you get some mud on there. There are some windshield wipers that you operate manually by just going squeaky, squeaky. That's how the windshield wipers work, all manual. But you can't see much out of that, especially when it gets dirty like that. Just want to show you quickly that thing I was telling you about, that part of the NBC system. You have these air canisters that help filtrate the air, and there's a couple knobs that the driver can make the airflow different in the turret or in the driver's area. So that's where that is. I'll show you to you real quick. Here's another entire function for the driver to take care of. That is that red handle, those handles there just to the right of your driver's seat. That is for the hull drain plugs, and it's kind of like a little bit of a bilge system. So when there's water inside the tank, when you've either taken on water accidentally or you've washed your tank down when you got real muddy or something, then you pull those handles. I'm sorry, I don't remember how this functions exactly. I didn't use them very much. When you're in a desert, and I was in two different deserts. I was in the Mojave Desert and then the Arabian Desert. You don't get you get dust and dirt, but you don't get muddy and a lot of water unless you're washing the tank out. So anyway, you'd pull up those levers, and I think I don't remember if you had to pump it or if it just did it automatically and it was, servo actuated. I forget. But anyway, it was a way to have the drain drain water out the bottom of your hole. The caution light, there's a caution little note there, and I wish the heck I could remember what it cautions you of, but I just don't remember. But anyway, that's what that thing is there. When you're in Germany or you're in wet environments, then you need to wash your tank out a lot, because like at Hohenfels, one of the main training areas in Germany, Hohenfels is famous, and Vilseck is famous for how muddy it was. I mean, when you see YouTube videos of tanks being stuck in the mud, it's almost always at Vilseck or Hohenfels. Super muddy, and you wind up you have to clean your tank. You can't just leave your tank all muddy. And a lot of times, again, you drive with the hatch open because of limited visibility, and you get all sorts of mud and dirt inside the tank, on the outside too. But those drain holes were primarily for when you were going to clean your vehicle out and allow the water to get out of your tank. In the Sheridan, because I was in an M551 Sheridan too, the Sheridan, right underneath the driver's seat was a metal plate with a handle, and you would twist the handle and this relatively heavy metal plate would just fall out. There was a hole in the bottom of the tank right beneath the driver's hole. You lift up the driver's seat and you could, as a driver, climb out of your tank through the bottom of that hole. It also functioned as a gigantic drain hole. I mean, it was big enough for a human to fit through, barely. It was like an escape hatch, but it also functioned as a drain hole. Well, in the M1, you don't have that. There's no way to get out of the bottom of the tank like a lot of the World War II tanks and early Cold War tanks had. So this pump mechanism of getting water out of your tank was how it did it in the M1. And to show you how muddy it can get and the need for this, let me show you real quick what can happen to you. Look at this poor sucker. Yeah, good luck cleaning that up, buddy. He's in for a long afternoon of washing the tank. I don't know if it's part of the $4 million price tag on each M1, but you can't just take a fire hose and spray down the inside of your tank. But you can see it can get very dirty, and you can't just leave it that way. So you can take some water and get off a lot of this, not just like a sponge. I mean, you can really hose this thing down pretty well. Maybe that water resistance and the parts all being relatively resistant to being hosed down is part of the $4 million price tag. When you get your tank really muddy like that on the inside, if that's true, you'll be real glad that you don't have to take a toothbrush. You can just hose this baby down pretty much. Okay, now let's take a look at some actual driving skills you need to acquire as the driver. One of those is night driving. When you're driving a tank, you can always just turn your headlights on. We saw there was a high beam, but normally when you're doing tactical movement, you can't just run around like a car with your lights on. You have to use blackout lights. And blackout lights, this is the back of the tank's blackout light system. And blackout lights are a way for your eye to see little red dots and to gauge the distance of the target, not the target, of the next vehicle in front of you when you're in a convoy. So if there's a tank in front of me and we're moving in a file, in a single row, I can follow the tank that's in front of me without being able to see it all that well, because they use these what are called cat's eyes or blackout markers. And this picture is showing you that your eye, the way your eyeball works, I don't ask an eyeball doctor, but basically a human can make out one dot on the left-hand side there. You see where it says more than 55 meters. So when you see one dot, you know you've gotten pretty far from the vehicle in front of you. When you see two dots, you're at 18 to 50 meters, and that's about the right follow distance. So when you're following a tank using cat eyes at nighttime, you want to be able to see two dots. If you see four dots, like that one on the very right side of the picture shows, that's less than 18 meters. That's too close. So you want it to hover between two dots and four dots, usually. I'm going over the cat eyes here, the cat eye system and the blackout lights in great detail, because I spent a lot of time doing this. Unlike most tankers or even people in the military, you don't spend a lot of time doing night exercises to begin with. But because I was part of the Op 4 at the NTC, we were doing night maneuvers all the time. It's another video's worth of stories, but we would do a lot of night incursions and go basically wake up Blue Force. They'd be sleeping in their sleeping bags, and we would get in there with our giant searchlight on the front of our mocked-up T-72. They'd all be dead asleep at 3 in the morning. We'd show up, blast a searchlight on them, and had a ball, frankly, messing with them. Again, that's another story for another day. But on the way to finding them, we would have to follow each other in the darkness so they wouldn't know that we were approaching. And we would use these blackout lights to be able to follow each other in column. So I spent hours and hours and months and literally years of my life following these little red dots as the driver. Well, not years, but a good year when I was the driver at NTC. I would follow these dots. And then when I got to Germany, and I was still the driver at that point, deployed to the Gulf War as the driver. The main engagement, the famous 72 hours of combat, I didn't get any sleep at all. We were engaging targets, and then when we weren't, we were maneuvering at nighttime in long columns following, you guessed it, cat eye blackout lights. I didn't get any sleep at all, and I've just still have got emblazoned in my brain following these little red lights because it was raining one night. It was dark, completely dark. You're off the grid, and all you can see are these little lights. And the only thing you can't see if you're turning left or right. You just got to keep those lights in front of your tank. That's why I operated for 72 hours straight. It felt like looking at these little red lights. I think I've been psychologically scarred by those little red lights. Almost all vehicles in the military have a blackout light system. The one I was showing you the first picture of, that's basically the shape and the design on the M1 tank. I don't. This is somebody's just bought one here online or something. I think that looks something might be on a Humvee or something. But every vehicle pretty much has this same system of navigating by night when you're following behind somebody. I'm sorry this picture's so small, but it's the only one I can find that looks like the device I remember. The driver has a night vision periscope. It's an IR system, and I'm pretty sure this is it because you see at the bottom of that, if you can make out this little teeny tiny picture, the little bottom of it's got the vision port that fits in the center viewing block. The viewing block in the M1 is not, you're not actually looking right out the thing. They're always built like a periscope because there's a set of mirrors and things that allow you to sort of see up in that thing. It's not like you're literally just looking right out a window. But anyway, so this periscope would be replaced with the main driver's viewport. And it was the typical, night vision green thing that you always see in, Spec Ops games and stuff. A lot of people have actually seen other types of night vision devices. But the driver one is, if you thought you couldn't see much at daytime, you really can't see much because the window's even smaller in this. It's amazing what you can see in the night vision. That's why, everyone, their cousin uses it in the military now. And the fidelity of what you can see is just stunning. But the field of view is tiny. You can only see literally just directly in front of you, and your depth perception is by and large lost. So when you're driving versus, say, walking or just looking for things is one thing. Actually navigating over hills and bumps and maybe cliffs, the tank really can flip over. Many people have been killed in tanks in peacetime training activities because they flipped over. They fell in ditches. It's a serious, real hazard. Navigating at night is a very dangerous business in general, and doing it with a night vision device does not make it easy mode at all. The reason I hated the night vision periscope for the driver when I used it the 4 or 5 times I used it was just an additional sense of claustrophobia. The driver's hole is really like a rat trap. I mean, you're really trapped in there under many situations. Because there's no hole underneath your seat to get out of the tank, you are literally trapped in that position. There's no way to get out unless the turret is turned a certain direction. When you add this night periscope to it, you now are sandwiched in your seat even further because you can't maneuver your hatch open with that periscope in. And also it's pretty tall, so it juts down into your chest kind of, so you're looking at sort of almost belt length level with this thing. So if you felt trapped before, you're really going to feel claustrophobic with this thing jutting into your limited space that you have to start with. Yeah, it works. I hated using it because of that sensation. Aha, HET. What in the world is HET? HET is a very important driver skill you have to acquire when you're a tanker, especially in an M1, because you have to move your tank. And tanks do not just drive all over. The weight of the tank prohibits it from being used on a lot of roads. Just the sheer gas mileage, of course, is horrible. The wear and tear on a very expensive vehicle. So you either move your tank by rail, ship, or HET. HET stands for Heavy Equipment Transport. There's a couple different models of them. The standard one, the one I was most familiar with, was a sort of an Oshkosh model. I'm not a truck expert. Maybe some of you transportation guys will know all about this, but I know all about HETs from a tanker's perspective because see how that tank is sitting on the back of that truck? Yeah, that's not so easy. That's a real driver skill and a real adventure you get to go through, putting your tank up on that HET. And yes, there are guys in the transportation corps that can drive your tank when need be or when you're not around under certain conditions. But generally speaking, the M1A1 tank drivers, drive their tank up onto that head themselves. The driver does it, not some other specialized staff. So it's a skill you definitely have to acquire. Putting your tank up on that truck is done in a variety of environments, at ports, out in the field, on rough terrain. I've loaded my M1 tank on one of those heads in 6 or 7 different environments of varying difficulty. On nice flat pavement like that, it's not too bad, but that's not normally where you have the luxury of loading your tank. The tank gets loaded. I had to load the tank on a head out at NTC a couple of times. And that is tricky business, buddy. This is such an unknown part of driving a tank that I wanted to show you some videos that really emphasize how tricky this whole process is. So again, normally when you're not in combat, you're driving the tank unbuttoned like this guy with the hatch open. You see how he's got to get up there, right? Alright, doesn't look that bad, right? But it's a lot more complicated than that, because you can't see and do anything yourself. What you're doing is following ground guides, like this gentleman here on the thing is telling him to stop there, and because you can neutral steer, you have to. But here's the real problem. See how you're hanging off that truck? Yeah, you're hanging off the edge on both sides. So he's getting him to make minute movements here, left and right. So again, this guy's ground guiding him. It's real close because your track is not that wide. Here, this guy here is off. See, he's off to the left quite a bit. He's fixed it. So this they cut away because he must have backed down and refixed it, because now he's centered very nicely. But you see the tank right there, you can see it overhangs the truck on both sides. You have to get that baby dead centered. Most of the time, transportation guy, the guy that's running the het, will help you chain your vehicle. But this is also something that the tank crew will also do. I did chain my tank to the het, learned how to do that. There's kind of a cross bracing system, and then he's backing him up here because you got to put some tension on some of the front chains, and then that's how you do it. You sort of back and forth it so that there's tension on each side. Anyway, the point of what I want to show you this for is they made that look easy because these guys know what they're doing, but it's a real scary affair for the driver because you're completely trusting the ground guide at that point. And your tank points way up in the air. It doesn't look like it, but you can't see anything. There's like a moment of total trust and a moment of truth that occurs as your tank is going up those ramps. And you know, as the driver, that there's very little room for error. It's not just M1s that, do this. All tanks get moved this way. Here's a Merkava. This truck usually is pretty darn primitive. They don't even have a ramp all the way to the ground. Every tank has to be designed in part to not be any wider than can fit on these hets. So it's an integral part of tank design most people don't think about. I'll never be able to communicate the terror that the driver goes through when loading his tank onto one of these things, because it just doesn't look that bad. It's a little bit like when you get up on like a diving board and you look down, it looks so far, but on the ground it doesn't look that bad. Just jump, kid, jump. Loading your M1 tank onto a het is a complete leap of faith in your ground guide person that's telling you to go left and right so that your tank doesn't fall off the edge of that thing. Of course, the only one in any real danger of getting hurt is probably you, because you're the one in the tank when the thing rolls over, right? There's two kinds of people that help you load your tank onto a het. There's the transportation guys and everybody else, and there's your tank commander. The transportation guys and everybody else, you don't trust at all, and it's scary as all get out. Your tank commander, you do what he says, just the way it is. The TC runs the show all the time. You don't question, you do what the TC says. And I would trust him 100%. Everybody else, I was always real scared to load the het with those people. They didn't know me, I didn't know them. It was all very scary. When you're loading your tank on a het, and you're operating it with people that you don't know, this is what you see as you're moving your tank up on that ramp. Yeah, that's right. Blue sky. You don't see a thing. I mean, you can't see the het. You usually can't even see the guy ground guiding you. At that point, he's having to talk you through it. There's a certain moment when the tank's about to dip up. There's a certain angle where you generally can't see a thing, and you're straining your neck to try to see the guy ground guiding you. But yeah, that's what you see. And so you really got to trust that guy who's ground guiding. Let me show you what you see when your tank commander is actually doing this for you. Yes, that's right. It's love and hearts in the sky. When your tank commander's doing it, he knows you, you know him. You've worked together very closely. Every time my TC would ground guide me, if he was available to me at that time, I had no problem loading these hets, and everything was just gravy. This is just one of those things that's difficult to explain to a non-tank driver how involved and scary this process is, and you do it fairly frequently. There's nothing I can do to tell you how tough this is and what a valuable skill it is other than to just show you.